Cead Fáilte. 1,000 welcomes to Crann short stories and poetry for May 10th. I'm Terrance Ó Domhnaill, your village seanchaí, with more stories and poems from medium writers. I have 4 stories and 2 poems this week. The first is chapter 15 of the ongoing story From Beyond the Water Wall, a story about American Civil War veterans that will shake you up a little bit in the end. A wonderful story about a wolf puppy and his savior. This story comes in 2 parts. I'll read the second part next week. A story of a city park, a science fiction poem, and another Zen poem by Dave B. So gather around once more and let me read them to you under the shade of the Crann, the tree of life. So my first story, chapter 15, From Beyond the Water Wall, entitled Dilemma by Don Woodby, in the Publishing and Fiction Writers' Den. Previously, Mars, Wren, and Spike and Abby arrived at the fisherman's house. Spike noticed that one of the maps represented the inside of Boga's mansion. During breakfast, not many words were said. Mars and Wren ate calmly, having no urgency for the first time since they could even remember. After they finished, Trench looked at both of them and said with a steep voice, "We need to talk to you." And so they moved to the couch. Abby collected the dishes and brought them to the kitchen. Spike and the fisherman sat on one side and Mars and Wren on the other. "So yesterday, after you both went inside the room, we stayed here talking. I don't know how much you heard, so I'll start from the beginning. Spike saw the map that we had no idea what it represented, and he said this is Boga's palace. Now, I don't know how reliable this information is, but he sure had some good points." Spike kept fidgeting his feet. "I was in charge of spying on his house. We had a plan to invade it. Not a very solid one, but we observed it for a couple of months before completely giving it up. We thought it'd be impossible to execute it, and at the time it really was. I can assure you that I remember every detail from outside of his place. What I had no idea about was the inside. The walls are pretty well guarded, and we realized that even if we could climb them, we would have no idea how to move inside there. And to be fair, we didn't even know what to do in case we managed to be there. It was all very abstract. So, as you see," the fisherman said with a grin, "they were just plain revolutionary as always." Spike shrugged. "Anyway, I'm sure that map represents his house, and if it is still accurate, it is a pretty detailed representation of the inside, including shifts and routes of the security personnel. It may be outdated, but still." "Okay," Mars said, "so this is pretty valuable. What I don't see is how that concerns us exactly. There's nothing for us there. I think if we use this thing right, we could break in and kill Bogus." A cold shiver ran through Mars' spine. Wren bit her lips, tilted her head, and leaned forward. Her eyes were wide open. "I'm assuming that you are telling me this because you want our help," Mars said flatly. "Precisely," Trench said. "Not because we think you're skilled, or that you are particularly well suited for the job. We simply need more people, and we can't trust anyone. Now, if you help us, I will help you get to that cave as soon as possible. And also, I'll help her across the border. We both win." "What cave?" Spike asked. "This is a matter for another moment," Mars said. He then turned to the fisherman. "Okay, I'm listening. So, you guys will help us come up with a plan and execute it. I mean, I know you have a bag full of explosives, and you have that." He pointed to Mars's arm. "So I'm pretty sure you can help somehow. After we're finished, I will fulfill my part of the deal, and they will help with that too." Spike nodded as Abby walked back from the kitchen. "So, what did they say?" Abby asked, rubbing her hands together. "We're going to discuss it for a while," Mars said. He held Wren's hand and pulled her to the room, and closed the door behind him. "How do you feel about this?" he asked. "Honestly, pretty fine. It's always felt a bit off to simply escape without doing anything else. I mean, you have a reason to just leave. You have someone waiting for you. I don't. I think this would give me peace of mind." He stopped for a moment. "I was taken aback at first," he said, "but I don't think I have a problem with it. Not morally, at least. My problem is just assessing the risk. This is a suicide mission. How are we even going to do it? We have the map. It is something. Besides, we don't have a choice. We need his boat." "I know it, and I'm fine doing it. I'm just not comfortable putting you in danger." She looked deeply into his eyes. "I don't mean to sound harsh, but it's not your choice." Mars looked down. "I guess you're right. So it's decided?" The others waited silently in the living room when Mars and Wren walked through the door. Trench slowly stood up from the couch and opened his arms. "So, What's it going to be? We'll do it, Mars said hesitantly, but we need to know some details first. He then sat on the couch and paused for a moment. I need to know about the time frames. Let's assume we managed to kill Bogus. What would happen next? This is something we'll have to plan, Spike said. We can't know exactly how things are going to play out after. We understand that, Wren said, but we need to know something going in, something concrete. We can't just fulfill our part of the agreement and wait forever for you to do yours. Exactly, Mars said. Immediately, the fisherman spoke out. We will probably have to lie low for some time, retreat and wait. But I'm assuming in 1 week or so we can get you to that cave. Mars exhaled. Okay, we'll do it then. Just don't screw us after. He walked through the door and began pacing outside. Wren waited a moment and then followed after him. She found him sitting on the grass under the shadow cast by the house, looking deep into the woodland. What's the matter? She asked, sitting next to him and holding his hand. Our original plan was so much more simple. It would be much easier had we not been raided in the first place. You know, she said softly, leaning her body until their shoulders met, that's how life is. We have to play with the cards we're dealt. Of course, it would be better if nothing bad had happened. It would be better if you hadn't been shot in your world. It would be better if you hadn't been killed in this world. It would be better if everything was like it used to be a couple of years ago here. But it's not so. That's the reality we have. Those are the facts. Now, we have to do the most we can to achieve our goals and hope for the best. Because some things are simply out of our control. We are here now. As he listened to those soft-spoken, yet very compelling words, he realized how similar his own advice would have been if the situations were reversed. He gently smiled at her, stood up, and pulled her toward him. This is a beautiful house. Maybe we could live in a place like this after everything's over. She bit her lips and looked down. You can. Mars wrapped his hand around her shoulder, and they walked back inside. Before they opened the door, Wren jolted back and gasped. What's wrong? Mars asked. I saw something there. 2 eyes. Think it was an animal. A big one for sure. It was probably nothing. Let's go back in. He grabbed her by the shoulders and guided her into the house. Hades, Wren shouted. The cat ran from the kitchen, across the living room, and into their room. I haven't seen him all day. He was outside this morning. Spike sat sprawled on the couch, wandering in the bushes, maybe trying to hunt something. Is it not dangerous to let him loose? Abby asked. You can't cage a cat, the fisherman said, and certainly not in a house like this. Maybe he will bring us some rats, Abby said. Probably better than Spike's pig. The fisherman sat on the couch, a can of beer in his hand. Abby was beside him. We have to discuss the details then, she said, taking the can out of his hand and taking a sip. They looked at each other for some time, waiting for someone to draw the first words. Mars and Wren sat at the table. Spike stood up, walked toward the window, and leaned on the ledge, observing the movement outside. Our plan to escape, Mars broke the silence, was to plant bombs around the city to create a distraction. We assumed the border would be less watched, and we could use this moment to cross. He restlessly spun a single coaster that had been forgotten on the table since earlier. Spike slowly turned around and pressed his back on the ledge. Maybe we still have enough of them. Chapter 16, next week. So my next story, as I mentioned, is a kind of an after Civil War story. It's called Toasting Fallen Brothers, a short story by Kelly Ronan. And he published this in Illumination. A toast to Fido. Nathaniel raised his glass, shouting toward the entrance of Fanny's Tavern in Rochester, where his friend Elijah had just arrived for their reunion. It wasn't the usual way to greet someone you hadn't seen in a year, by toasting a dog. But Nathaniel hadn't waited for his late-arriving friend to get there before he started drinking, and he wasn't going to interrupt the toast he was making to follow formalities. With slurred speech, he then directed Elijah toward the table he had staked out for the pair and shouted for him to grab a glass from the bartender on the way. It was surprising the two recognized each other across the smoke-filled room. Each weighed 60 or 70 pounds more than they had the last time they were together. But when you spend every minute packed together in close quarters for months, as they had, you don't forget faces, no matter how much they may have filled out. Elijah approached the table, imagining all the men, critters, and ideals Nathaniel had toasted before he got there. No doubt there was a salute to survival and a tribute to fallen brothers on the list. The reunion that day would be attended only by the two men. None of the soldiers the pair knew from Company H of the 44th New York Regiment had survived the war to share drinks with them. These other soldiers actually had made it through all the battles and the skirmishes. What they hadn't survived were the wretched and inhumane conditions of Andersonville Prison, where they were taken as POWs during the last several months of the Civil War. Elijah had arrived at the tavern more than a half an hour late. Judging by the amount of whiskey remaining in the bottle atop the table, he figured that Nathaniel had 7 or 8 drink a head start on him. He had a somewhat embarrassing excuse for his tardiness. He hadn't gotten into town by train from Albany the night before, but had misread the map of Rochester earlier that afternoon, making a left on Main Street instead of a right. He walked a good 2.5 miles the wrong way before realizing he was reading the map upside down. You'd think an experienced Union soldier would have known the difference between north and south. By the time he had been captured, Elijah had been fighting Johnny Reb for more than 2 years in places like Gettysburg, Fredericksburg, and Chickamauga. Thankfully, being able to read a map hadn't been important in Elijah's wartime duty. He served as a teamster, where he worked with horses and mules to transport supplies and ammunition equipment for the Army. His specific responsibilities included the care and feeding of them. He may have been clueless with maps and directions, but he could get horses to do anything he wanted, mostly just by pointing and speaking to them in the right tone. "A toast to Fido," Elijah shouted back, pulling up a chair to the table. "Another bottle," he yelled to the burly bartender, who was wiping down glasses with a stained rag. Fido had been a guard dog at Andersonville. He was a mean-looking bull terrier, scarred across his face and neck with more than a few fights. Confederate guards used canines like him to corral and keep peace among the 30,000 Union prisoners crowded into the 26-acre open-air prison. Fido flashed his vicious teeth at soldiers like Elijah and Nathaniel, packing them each atop a tiny 4-foot by 3-foot plots of hardpan, barely able to move. After the toast, the 2 men agreed they owed their lives to the mean dog. We wouldn't have survived without him. They also toasted the relationship the dog had with Elijah. In another life, Elijah would have been born an animal, not a human, considering the way he could communicate with him. He could get a dog like Fido to do anything he wanted, in the same way he could with horses and mules. With a commanding voice, Elijah had directed Fido to the Confederate officer mess tent at the edge of camp, demanding that the dog get whatever food he could steal for them. Fido went wherever Elijah pointed, captivated by the man's demeanor and forgetting the fact that they served on different sides of the war. The 2 former soldiers talked more about Fido as they drank their whiskeys and shared memories. It actually wasn't much food, what the dog brought back. The meat was gristly and stringy, and it didn't taste particularly fresh, Nathaniel remembered. But they agreed it was a feast compared to the 3 ounces of dried rice and 1 tablespoon of salt per day that were their official prisoners' rations. And there was a lot of work required to get the tiniest amount of meat from the bones the dog carried back to us in his mouth, Elijah recalled. But what Fido stole from them was undeniably the difference between life and death. On average, about 100 Union soldiers died each day in the abominable conditions of the camp, most from dysentery or starvation. Elijah and Nathaniel clung to life until set free in April of 1865. They decided their canine friend was worthy of a second salute. "A toast to Fido," who somehow found a Confederate officer's mess tent on the south end of the prison simply by me pointing the way. Elijah raised his glass, slurring his own speech by then. Nathaniel began to throw back his shot of whiskey when he was suddenly shaken from his drunkenness, spitting out the liquor on the tavern's plank floorboards. The Confederate officer's mess wasn't on the south side of Andersonville. It was on the north side, Nathaniel shouted. On the south side was the cemetery where they buried our fallen brothers, he said. "That's where you pointed when you told Fido to bring back meat?" Elijah sobered up quickly with the gruesome realization of why the meat Fido had brought them was so gristly, stringy, and strange-tasting, and why the ribs were so big compared to the amount of meat on them. "A toast to our fallen brothers," the men clinked glasses with a newfound somberness. "We wouldn't have survived without them." So I'm going to take a little break right now and go get a drink of water. And when I come back after my little advert, I'll read you 2 more stories and a couple of short poems. So I'll be right back. I want to invite everyone to listen to Crann and beatha Stories and Poetry every Monday night at 11 p.m. Eastern Time on Reese Across America Radio. search out www.reachacrossamerica.org/radio by typing in the word Reach in these mobile apps, iHeartRadio, Odyssey, or TuneIn. Or find them on a web browser and join us to listen to the show and support WAA Radio, Whiskey Alpha Alpha Radio for any veterans listening. Reach Across America is a nonprofit radio station that supports veterans programs and organizations that help needy veterans. By joining us at Reach Across America, you are helping to support veterans in need across the U.S. So search us out and enjoy the shows they have to offer, and thank a veteran while you're at it. Now I want to take another minute or so to ask for a donation of any amount to help me keep this podcast going and to advertise my website. I've set up a donation tab on the Crann and beatha Stories and Poetry webpage at rss.com and a donation page on my website at www.crannandbeatha.com, using PayPal for your security. This way there is no credit card info saved anywhere, and you can use any currency you wish from around the world. If you like this podcast, please share it with everyone you know in your social circles, as the writers I showcase in this podcast deserve all the exposure they can get. I created this podcast for them because I love to read their work, and I believe it should be shared with the world. Now I want to explain how to find my website. Since the show is audio only, just take the website name from the podcast logo shown here and search for it. Visitors finding the website for the first time will reach the welcome page to learn a little bit about what's inside. There you'll see a homepage link at the bottom of the page. Click on it if you wish to enter my world. And on the menu bar at the top, there are links at all the pages in the website. Feel free to look around all you want. If you should happen to want to buy one of my books, all the better. Thank you for your patronage and support. Now back to the show. Welcome back. So my third story of the day is entitled After the First Shot, Only the Strongest Would Survive by Mariana Busarova, and published this in a Hub publication. First, he heard the shot. It wasn't so close, but the sound was sharp. It started with a strange whistling and ended with a bang. He wondered who could be shooting this time of year. The hunting season had ended some months ago. It was time for people to give the wild animals at least a little peace, so they could mate and reproduce. But this was a shot from a hunting rifle. Elijah's ear was tuned to it. He often came to the forest cabin, left to him by his grandfather, and wandered through the woods. He knew when it should be safe not to stumble upon a path of a stray shot. He was more afraid of people than animals most of the time. He quieted down next to an ancient tree and listened intently. Someone hurriedly moved away in the distance. Poachers, Elijah thought to himself. Some individuals feared neither laws of nature nor the Lord. What was that feeling of inviolability, he wondered. Elijah continued down the path toward the river. The forest had strangely quieted down, as if it had hidden itself after that gunshot, shattering its fragile tranquility. Suddenly a strange sound caught his attention. It resembled the cry of a small child, but only for a moment. Then it rose into a mournful howl. A wolf cub. Elijah saw the wolf cub near the stream. It was pacing toward the water, then returning to a rock at the end of the path. There it stopped and let out a brief, mournful howl, again and again. The man took a few more steps to see exactly what was happening. Then he saw the large body of another wolf lying next to the rock. It was likely a she-wolf, the mother of the cub. Was she dead, or was she injured? The man hesitated. Perhaps it was too risky to approach the she-wolf, especially if she was only injured. But at that moment, the wolf cub nudged her insistently with its snout, and then howled again. The she-wolf didn't budge. She would have reacted somehow to her cub's call if she were alive. Her body was limp. Elijah cursed quietly through his teeth. Those dirty bandits had killed the she-wolf, thus condemning the wolf cub to almost certain death. It was so tiny, and hardly had a chance to survive on its own. What could he do about the cub? Almost nothing. But his heart wouldn't allow him to turn and walk away just like that. Rage bubbled in his blood. He couldn't understand the reasons for such primitive cruelty. Where was the humanity? It was nowhere to be found. How could that poacher's finger not tremble, killing a mother? Truly, a she-wolf, but still a mother. Filthy scoundrels. Elijah took a few determined steps toward the two animals and stopped, about 2 meters away from the prostrated body of the she-wolf. The wolf cub looked at him trustingly with huge dark eyes. It was so tiny that it hardly understood the danger it was in. After that, the wolf cub nudged the she-wolf 2 more times with his snout, whimpering like the first time, and then curled up next to his dead mother's body. The man clenched his teeth in helplessness. What could he do for this poor creature? He knelt down and gently reached his hand forward. "Hey, come here, little wolf. What should I do with you now, little one?" The cub stared at him with no fear. It was obvious the small animal had never seen a human. It was so vulnerable. Elijah sighed. Could he take the cub with him? But it would grow up quickly, and then what would he do? It wasn't a pet. It wasn't a dog, no matter how much they looked alike. It was a wild animal. The wolf had its instincts deeply inherited from the wild parents. Perhaps he could call the authorities. In the woods, he had no internet connection and almost no signal for his mobile phone. Until any reaction, the small animal would be dead. It was sure. What would the cub eat? The she-wolf was probably still nursing him. The man stood up. These were the cruel laws of nature. Weak ones were supposed to die. Only strongest would survive. Wasn't it the same with people? The vulnerable and the sick had almost no possibility of success. Even the human world was like a jungle. Elijah headed towards the path. A lump stood inside his throat, and he felt it difficult to breathe. Then he heard the cub's wail. It was weak and almost like crying. Elijah looked over his shoulder at the animal. The cub stood up and walked towards him. As soon as the wolf reached him, its little muzzle brushed against the man's ankle. Elijah sighed again. He couldn't leave the baby wolf there. How could he sleep peacefully knowing that this little one was doomed to certain death? He crouched down, took it in both hands, and it snuggled trustingly against his chest. Wolfie, as Elijah named it, ran around the small yard next to the cabin. The man bought some food, suitable for small puppies, and the baby wolf ate it with an enviable appetite. It was growing pretty fast. He had spoken to various wildlife organizations to take care of the wolf. He had no idea how long it would take to stir and take action. He was afraid that his new friend would be locked up somewhere. Just thinking that he might be put in a zoo made him sick. Deep down, Elijah hoped the wolf would grow up quickly and disappear into the darkness one night, summoned by the wild blood that ran through its veins. He didn't want Wolfie to face human cruelty a second time. My 4th story is called The Wild Treasure in the Old Park. Sadie returns to the one place she felt a connection with to rediscover some nature's magic by Sarah Fellers in the Fiction Writer's Den. Sadie had only been there once before, the old park at the end of the neighborhood. Everyone else waved it away, shrugged it off, and walked by it without a thought. That was exactly the kind of place Sadie needed to be, somewhere that understood what it was like to be dismissed. She had gone there a year ago for that reason, and she had seen something incredible. It made her realize the truth behind invisibility. Oh, if only she could see it again now. The park looked like something on a postcard or a high-definition nature documentary. The vibrant green tops of towering oaks, palms, cedar, and longleaf pine trees flowed into each other against the vast blue sky. Below, a thick blanket of grass covered the earth, with the occasional clump of daisies and phlox plopping up throughout to get their share of the unencumbered sun rays. Sun rays that turned the surface of the river nearby into wavering starlight, bathing the creaking old boardwalk. Birds sang as breezes lifted and fell steadily, their sweet tune carried to the empty pavilions nearby, their stone bases showing their age and neglect with every chipped edge. The wooden picnic tables inside the pavilions were about as weathered with years' worth of carved initials, painted doodles, and scrawled names, only barely hiding the cracks and rot. This park had witnessed many things, but this neglect was new. It saw the happy couples who first met and later married under the oak trees. They celebrated in those pavilions and left their mark, literally, forever on the tables. The park welcomed families onto its boardwalk, runners early in the morning to its shaded trails, and artists with their paintbrushes, pens, and cameras to enjoy the beauty of the natural world. Now it was a beauty that had become too natural, something wild, unkept, neglected, and yet thriving. Mother Nature at her best. She held this park in the absence of humans, her wayward children. Sadie could see it as she tromped through the woods that still held some semblance to a trail. Everyone had dismissed this park by now, and yet she had reason to believe that was for the best. A right at the giant oak tree, or was it a left? The tree was the oldest one in the park, and it was every bit as big as it was ancient. A rusty plaque next to it still gave away its 500 years, and its thickest branches twisted toward the ground, as though sagging from their own weight. She followed the path left for a bit, and then decided she had been right the first time. After a bit, she could see the second bend of the river. All Sadie had to do was make a sharp turn, and then she could finally see it. The patch of palms, the wall of green, that was her only obstacle to it. She walked to them slowly. These final steps felt almost sacred to her. She parted the giant, sharp leaves and stepped through the threshold. A carpet of wildflowers stretched before her. An ocean of color raced towards a line of trees that gave way to the endless blue. Sadie took a couple of steps forward. Hundreds of butterflies burst from the overgrowth at her movement, shining wings flittering towards the sky in a torrent of color. This was what Sadie had waited a whole year for. So many tiny wings, yet mighty in their number, playing with sunlight and the wind as they danced between billowing flowers and the ever-present freedom of the sky. She noticed them, proof of life thriving even when the rest of the world seemed to turn away, and they saw her, proof that they hadn't been completely forgotten in the wake of glass and steel. Now I have a couple of poems, and this first one is a science fiction poem. It's pretty short. It's called Life Loop, a science fiction poem by L.R. Conti, published in Future Tales and Second Chances. Pain stipples my vision. White sparks fly. I'm all bones and always cold, despite the summer heat. There are no more treatments, the doctor tells me, but there's an option. The loop, a neural implant inserted into my temporal lobe, will provide the perception of another life. My childhood holds memory hints, fantasies, Mom calls them. I study ornithology in college and marry for love. We raise 3 children, then retire to a lakeside cottage. The cancer comes in winter. Pounds peel off, and my bones feel colder than the frozen pipes. We've exhausted all therapies. Memories flood. There's an option, the doctor tells me. It's called the loop. And she says this was inspired by a dear friend who had pancreatic cancer. My last poem is entitled Witness by Dave B. In my poem, Witness, I speak through the voice of a tree, a silent observer of the ever-changing tapestry of human existence. Rooted deeply, my branches spread wide in a welcoming embrace, as I witnessed the fleeting joys, sorrows, and endeavors of those who passed beneath. With each season, sunrise and sunset, I absorbed the laughter and tears of generations, offering a steadfast, non-judgmental presence. As the world shifts around me, I remain a quiet custodian of both peace and turmoil, forever intertwined with the life that unfolds in my shade. This poem is a meditation on the serene, unspoken bond between nature and humanity. Silent I stand, arms wide, bark furrowed like aged brows. Seasons scroll, sunrise, sunset, a tapestry of footfalls beneath my shadow's embrace. Laughter blooms, tears seep into roots, each a pulse through my veins. Lovers carve initials, a fleeting mark, yet I remain, unmoved yet holding all. Wars rattle distant hills, peace blossoms in the soil, every whisper a leaf in my heart. In the stillness I witness, not judging, simply being with the world. And that's all I have for you this week. I hope you enjoyed everything. Maybe some of the stories made you think a little bit, maybe laugh a little bit, maybe bring a little tear. Emotion is a good thing. So with that, I will leave off, and hopefully you'll listen to me again next week. Sláinte. Garamahagat. Thank you for listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed the variety of stories and poems again this week. Maybe one of them might touch your heart a little. Disclosure for everyone. In order to read the complete stories and poems, you'll need to sign up for a subscription to Medium. If I see a link by the author on one of the stories to allow everyone to read it, I will let you know in the newsletters. Please return again next week for another episode of Crann, Beatha, Stories and Poetry. As a seanchaí, I want to continue to delight you with a story or a poem that may bring you a smile or make you think a little bit after we part for the day. As I say goodbye this week, I wish to leave you with this Irish blessing as you go about your day. Long life and fair health to you. Cead Fáilte a gúsprech, seanchaí. Slán go foil. Goodbye for now.